Hey everybody, it's day 133, Spiritual Healthcare. Welcome to the first Spiritual Healthcare of 2021. It's kind of weird to be finally in the new year, but I hope you guys had a really good New Year's. I know there wasn't a whole lot of outdoor celebration going on. I hope you guys still celebrated indoors. I know most people just sleep through New Year's anyway, but good morning everybody. It's good to see you. Good morning, Ed. I hope you guys had a really good New Year's. It is now 2021, and we're going to be launching into, of course, the new month, the new year. Last week we talked about the fact that the clock does not dictate a new year. It's your energy and the momentum you carry into the new year that dictates the new year. And I hope you guys carried that into this January. So happy New Year, everyone. It's the first class of 2021. How crazy is that? Hello, good morning, Marge. Morning. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, everybody. It's so good. Nigel, nice to see you. Hey, everyone. It is first class of 2021, everybody. And really great questions today. Got a question about autism. Got a question about shadow people. We got a question of all sorts of things today. All sorts of things. Good morning to Sally. Oh, like my scarf. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to John. John says, I hope you're well. Yeah, doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. Been busy, been busy, lots of projects. One of the projects actually that I've been working on and just finished the other day. I know some of you guys got to see it on, I posted it to the Entity Seeker Facebook page. And for those of you who follow me on the Snake and Pyre page, you've probably seen it as well. My partner and I did a new fire performance video to one of his songs, Sweet and Gritty, and it turned out really, really well. So if you guys want to see us doing just crazy fire stuff, check out the Facebook page. I'll repost it again today so you guys can see it. But we had a lot of fun with that. So I'm glad to see everybody. And good morning, Shadow and Brandy and Des and Lori. Nice to see you. It is so good to see you guys. And so today we're talking about autistic kids, and we're talking about shadow people and all sorts of really interesting things. Lots of questions that came in, which I love. I love when you guys send me questions. I try to get to everything. So today is going to be pretty cool, I think. I hope you guys had fun on New Year's or slept through it, whatever. Lori says she saw the new video. It was great. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was really fun to film it. It was super fun, and it was just it was really simply done, but it's such a blast doing that. For those of you guys who don't know, I do fire eating and levy wand and fire breathing and all sorts of stuff like that. And my partner composes the music, and then I turn around and create a choreography video or something creative with it, and it's one of the best one of the best things. We have so much fun. It was really cool, and it was really good. So for those of you guys who have not seen my fire stuff, you can go to snakeandpyre.com, and it's all there, and I'll post that later on the Entity Seeker Facebook page for you guys. So it was really cool. So anyway, let's dive into this. I wanted to start with Dan's question this morning. He emailed this in, and I thought this was a really cool discussion point because I think a lot of people have questions about this. He asked, any known documentation between autistic people and the paranormal? I ask because I'm seeing a pattern that I hope isn't a trend. My first case was with an autistic person, and something they summoned or attracted to them. Apparently the promise to be normal is a common theme. I've seen nothing but extreme issues. While I don't expect it just to be autistic people, as I've heard similar with those with mental illness who are into illegal substances. I'm struggling to understand this relationship. So I love this question, and it was really, really good. And Dan is here now. Good. Because this is a great conversation piece. And I actually work with a number of people who have autism. a lot of my family, some of my film crew, lots of people that I know, especially in the artistic world, are also autistic. And it is a spectrum. So for those of you guys who don't know too much about autism, it's a spectrum disorder, which means that you can be everywhere from low functioning to very, very high functioning. People that are or kids and adults who struggle to communicate at all the way up to people who are genius, absolute genius, and just have small struggles or small differences in which how they perceive the world. So autism is really it's a perceptual change. It is not caused by vaccines. It is not caused by something out coming in. It's something that is neurological. It's neurological. So anyway, so my family actually helps to run one of the autism centers here in Edmonton, and has not only is one of my best friends autistic, but his son is as well on the spectrum, and so this is an area that I've seen quite a bit about, and in the realm as well of not only mental illness, but people being misdiagnosed with mental illness that actually are having paranormal or psychic experiences. So this is a big topic for a short spiritual health care, but we'll try to get through it as best we can. So the short answer is yes, there is documentation. There's much documentation actually about kids and people who have autism who are having paranormal experiences. One case was investigated by a fellow by the name of James Matlock, who reported at a conference that he had encountered a case with a very high functioning autistic boy who firmly believed that he was the reincarnation of his mother's father who had abused her. And this was a really interesting case because both he and his brother were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And there are thoughts that autism is hereditary. So when he was about 3 to 4 years old, I guess, he was present. His mom was basically undergoing a therapy session, which I don't think he should have been at myself. But she was trying to deal with her feelings towards her father, and he immediately rushed in and put his hands on her and was like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant for, to abuse you, this kind of thing." And it was really interesting. And he never really, he seemed to relate to his grandfather, but his mom had noticed several behavioral traits as well that seemed to match. Like it was really interesting. And, at the same time, he was extremely multi-talented. He was very artistic. Enjoyed a lot of color coordination and matching, and was quite interesting. So anyway, there was thoughts that in this case that there might have been some sort of crossover, personality-wise, or in some sort of reincarnation situation that this might have been the case. But there's a lot of cases that I've witnessed myself, which have been very, very interesting, and I can really only speak to those. But my friend's son, who I was mentioning, we've had some interesting experiences with him, and the one that I remember specifically, he's 8 years old now, but mentally I wouldn't put him at 8 years old. He's very young, emotionally and mentally. But I remember about 2 years ago, we were all sitting downstairs and we were playing cards, and he was in the other room, and the other room was like a pool room, and there was a glass door, so you could see into the pool room and watch him. And we watched him for probably a good 20 minutes to half an hour, talking with somebody and laughing and interacting and having fun with them, and he would chase them around the pool. And then he'd have these moments where he'd have his toys and he'd get mad at them for touching his toys. He's like, no, don't do that. And he was having a very, very cohesive dialogue, which he normally doesn't really do. And it was really, really interesting to watch. And then whatever this was seemed to disappear. And he looked around and was like, where did you go? Where did you go? And as far as I know, it hasn't happened again. I'm over there frequently, and I haven't seen it again. But it's quite interesting, and I think the correlation, personally, I think the correlation has to do with people, not just autistic people, but people who are able to kind of tune out and be in the moment easier than other people. And autism is really about a lot of input, right? And how people process that input, which is why often, you'll have an autistic child or something seemingly melt down over, a bunch of noise or too much input in their environment or anything like that, because it feels to them like they can't shut it off, they can't filter that out, and it just becomes too much, and they lose it, and they don't have, some of them don't have a way of communicating that. So we have to remember that everybody perceives our world very, very differently. And so when we take those two things into account, people that are perceiving the world differently, and then people that are able to, tune into a different space, whether it be, a more peaceful space, whether it be, living more solidly in the moment, being able to focus or tune out a little bit more or tune into something else. You're gonna get people who, of course, have these interesting encounters with the paranormal. It's just going to come with the territory. So the big question is, and Dan brought up in his question, sort of this toxic relationship between people who have been diagnosed with something and maybe negative entities and whatnot coming in and having a negative interaction with them. So I've had that as well with clients. I had one quite a number of years ago now who was schizophrenic, been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but also had, on top of that schizophrenia, he had a negative entity in his space, and people had seen it. People had seen him be attacked by it. And unfortunately, the mental illness and his medications had left him very isolated. Even though he lived with people, he was isolated kind of to his own space. He didn't really want too much to do with other people. And he ended up becoming sort of buddy with this negative entity, even though the negative entity tended to be very violent. But when you asked him about it, he said, yeah, but there's good conversation, so I'm willing to forego it, even though it put him in the hospital at one point. It ended up swinging a 2x4 at him, and he ended up with a serious head injury. So it's a really difficult, as I say, subject to broach in a short amount of time. But when you've got, especially if you've got somebody who's lonely, if you've got someone who feels isolated already, we've talked in the past about the idea that, isolation can be the number one tactic of an abuser, whether it be a human or an entity, it doesn't really matter. And we when it comes down to people's mental health or anything like that, if you've got a situation where you're not looking after your emotional state, then you kind of leave yourself susceptible to some of this stuff in a negative way. It doesn't always have to be negative. A lot of people that, say, for example, have something like autism can have really, really great experiences with the paranormal and are more tuned in to maybe a grandmother who's passed away or something like that. So we can have both sides of the spectrum still, right? But it all depends on how we're processing and how we're viewing our how we're viewing the illness, how we're managing it. All of that kind of thing is really, really important. I think the key is, for anything like this, is that you really do, again, have to tend to and manage what you've got going on, and to make sure that you're not getting railroaded into the idea that you're mentally ill when you're just having a paranormal experience. So there's that aspect too. I've run into so many people throughout my career that, have gone to a therapist or gone to a doctor or said, or something like that. They've said, look, I've had this amazing experience and a really great experience. And they've immediately labeled these people as mentally ill and either had them committed or had them, examined or told them they were crazy or anything like that. So we gotta be careful and mindful about that too. In South America, there is now finally a counseling center for people who have had paranormal experiences, where they're not going to be thrown under the bus for having something really cool happen. And it's becoming a little bit more acceptable, but we still, within the medical field, we have to be very careful about who we talk to about this kind of thing, because it gets quickly labeled as, oh no, you're mentally ill, that was a hallucination, you must not be processing your grief very well, if you've seen this person, that means you're unhealthy, which is just completely not true. Lori's asking, do you think negative entities are more active during the pandemic because people are feeling isolated? That's interesting. I actually had this question come up on the new season of Haunted Hospitals when I filmed it in September. And there was a big question about that. Are people actually experiencing more stuff? And, ultimately the pattern is that, there's a couple of different things. So the answer to this question is kind of twofold. One being the fact that people are home more. So because people are home more, they can't really shove stuff under the rug and go to work and forget about it. So the stuff that they maybe weren't experiencing, because they were, just too busy with the world, is now suddenly becoming a little more apparent because they're home more, or they're now working at home. A lot of people have changed their jobs around to work at home. But also when people are in a fear state or in hyper awareness, then often what will happen is that people will start to look at things that are not paranormal and start to label them that way. So we've seen an increase in reports of things, but it's not necessarily because there's more paranormal occurrences. It's often because people are hyper aware and they're nervous. And then that translates into, oh my God, my house must be haunted. So there's not really an escalation, but there is a trend that there seems to be more of that happening. So, when it comes down to, negative entities and stuff like that, as soon as you see, mental health slip into depression or slip into upset or, any of that end of the emotional spectrum, yeah, you're gonna see people, start to have more negative experiences with this stuff. And which is why, one of the reasons why I wanted to start spiritual healthcare was to make sure that people are really paying attention to their own vibration, and realizing that we are not completely out of control here. We get to choose how we feel, because I think it's super, super important. And yeah, it is something that we have to be really vigilant about. And again, when people are experiencing this, who they're talking to. I have numerous people over the years, ask, where do I go for grief counseling where I'm not going to be labeled as crazy? And that's why I always recommend to people places like the Forever Family Foundation, which is run by Lloyd Auerbach, where you've got people that are extremely skilled investigators and counselors and mediums and people who won't tell you you're nuts, but are also not going to scam you, right? Because that's the other problem. So we don't want that either. But I highly recommend the Forever Family Foundation for anybody who's struggling with that. So long story short, mental illness and the paranormal. To touch briefly on the illegal substances aspect of the question. So that kind of opens another can of worms a little bit. There are plenty of field reports of intentional and spontaneous psi phenomena in regards to things like psychedelics and things like that, which actually really caught the attention of J.B. Rhine in the 1950s and 60s. He's the founder of the Rhine Institute, of course, and there were Harvard psychologists, a fellow by the name of Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who were involved in those studies as well. And apparently the only thing that stopped these testing sessions with the psychedelics is that they were having so much fun that they actually got into such laughing fits, and they were having so much fun with it they couldn't test anything. So they kind of quit. But a bunch of other parapsychologists, such as Stanley Krippner, for example, have investigated this kind of thing. And actually he tested it out for himself because he was looking into things like ESP and the use of psychedelics and precognitive experiences and premonitions. So he ended up having a precognitive vision of President Kennedy's assassination. He was on psilocybin a year before, and that serves as a pretty good example. And there's similar reports of ESP actually being experienced by consciousness researchers, chemists, anthropologists, all sorts of people throughout literature. So the idea, I think, originally that these people, they're just high or whatever, is being looked at a little bit closer now, and in terms especially with things like LSD and things like that. And I think it was very prejudiced sort of against the idea of ESP phenomenon at the time. So, but there's also things that have come out of that. So, for example, there's a psychiatric interview survey with the users of LSD, and I can't remember what year this was. I'll see if I can find it. But they basically reported precognitive experiences as one of the symptoms of LSD flashback phenomenon, and that's referred to hallucinogen persisting perception disorder. Big mouthful, I know. So there's a lot of controversy back and forth with that, which I won't dig into too much here, but that's sort of an interesting road to go down. So I mean, I think you have to look at a couple of things, especially with clients, when somebody's coming to you with this kind of thing, because you have to ask yourself, if somebody is using substances at all, and it's not in a study situation like parapsychology or something like that, then usually it's the person trying to escape out of their current reality, right? So if you've got somebody who's trying to escape out of their current reality, they're probably not hanging around too much on the positive end of that emotional spectrum because they're unhappy. And so, if you transfer that over to, say, for example, drug use or something like that, if they're going to have paranormal experiences while on drugs or anything like that, it's probably not going to be a very good experience, right? Because their vibration, that's just where their vibration's hanging out. So the stuff that happens to them is not going to shift, right? So, it's really, really interesting. And, it's worth looking into. As I say, it's a rabbit hole, but it is worth looking into. There was on Netflix for a while a documentary on DMT, but I don't know if it's still there or not. But that might be something to look at as well. It's really interesting. So, in short, is there a relationship between people who are autistic or have been deemed mentally ill and paranormal phenomenon? And oftentimes, there is a relationship, and there is documentation there. So if you go to the Sci Encyclopedia, because I always send people to the Sci Encyclopedia because it's genius, there's a lot of documentation there also. So moving on to the next question, though, I had to bring this one up because I thought this was so interesting, and it came from Cha Ling on Twitter, and it had to do with shadow people. Not our friend Shadow here, actual shadow people. And they wanted to know, are there different levels of shadow people? I used to live in Washington State, and it seemed like they were everywhere. Most seemed innocent, observing the surroundings. Some moved, but still seemed transparent. But there were a kind that seemed to have more form and seemed more sinister. I moved across the country to New Hampshire, and out here I only see darker shadow people. The difference to me seems almost spiritual, like one is a forest spirit and one is more sinister city spirit. So I thought this take was really, really great. And really interesting because shadow people have come up so frequently in the discussion of apparitions and paranormal phenomena and stuff like that. So I'll tell you my experience with shadow people is actually here in Edmonton. And this was kind of interesting. And her comment about, their comment about forest spirits, I thought was like, it was really good. So he brought up some cool stuff. So when in Edmonton here, we have a huge river valley, okay? A huge river valley. It's a really cool place. We have one of the most greenest cities in Canada and with the most parkland. And our river valley, over the years, I've hosted many classes there, and mainly because there's some really interesting phenomena. And Dan is saying he has a follower in Oregon who claims that he sees shadow animals. That's really, really interesting too. So our river valley used to be, thousands of years ago, volcanic land, and we've got a quartz bed that kind of sits underneath the river valley, and whenever you've got quartz, sometimes you'll end up with almost like wandering electromagnetic fields. Okay, like they're really strange. They're really wonky. The Gettysburg battlefield has a very, very similar geological makeup. So we ended up not only recording this weird electromagnetic phenomenon going on, but people were seeing what they called the Riverdale Bigfoot. So the Riverdale Bigfoot wasn't actually a Bigfoot. It wasn't actually a Sasquatch. What it was this great big hulking shadow person. And my very good friend who I work with regularly, Mr. Matt Spearin, who you guys probably have seen on some of the shows, I live down there. He lives very close to the river, and saw them coming in and out of his house. He would see them on the path when he used to walk his dog down there. And the neighborhood was seeing them so regularly that it just became known as the Riverdale Bigfoot. So we had the same experience with it. I've seen it twice, and it was quite something. I was bringing a class actually over a hill down to the river. And I thought I saw what I thought was Matt waiting to give the next section of the class down at the bottom of the hill, because it was nighttime, it was dark. And I got down there, or as I got closer, I should say, we ended up, I noticed that what I thought was Matt that had his back to me wasn't at all. It was actually this huge guy. But completely black, no features, no nothing, almost like just a dense void. And once it realized, I think, that I saw it, it didn't want anything to do with that, and it took about 2 to 3 strides across the road, which was a huge wide road, and disappeared into the shadows. It was just, once it hit the shadows, it was gone. We've had sightings of this throughout the river valley, all through close to the high level bridge, which goes across the North Saskatchewan River. So we've had quite a number of these sightings, and that's been my experience with them as well, is that they've been very elusive. Like once they see you looking at them, they want to disappear. So they seem very aware. People have asked me numerous times what they are. I don't think anybody has the answer for that at this point. They're still under investigation, really. There are some really good theories out there. Some people think that it might be something from a different frequency or a different realm or a different dimension that we're maybe can't see completely. Our spectrum of vision can't quite pick them up. So there was that idea that maybe it's not actually something that's completely present in this physical experience, that it's something coming in from somewhere else. So that was an option, but there's been others as well. People have thought that maybe they are actually like some sort of negative entity or something like that. I don't think that that's really been the case. As far as I know, I've only heard of a handful of cases where it's been something that's been aggressive and terrifying, although it has happened. I think one of the tricky parts about shadow people, and this is a trend that I've kind of noticed as I've been sort of collecting cases on it and research and stuff like that, has been the fact that a lot of people experience shadow people in, I think, what would be safe to classify as sleep paralysis. So this is where things get really tricky with these. So some of the cases that have come up over the years have been people who have experienced these. They've sort of woken up from a dead sleep, or they feel like they've woken up from a dead sleep, and it's standing over their bed and it attacks them somehow, and they're fighting this shadow person, and then it disappears and whatnot. So, and they have all the symptoms that go along with things like sleep paralysis: the night terror, the feeling of being suffocated, something sitting on you. Of course, that's where the stories of the succubus and the incubus came from, things like that. So it becomes we have to begin to sort through some of these cases a little bit, because even though some of these cases might sound like, okay, yes, this is like a shadow person experience, a lot of people that experience sleep paralysis also experience, and these night terrors also experience this form of this shadow person coming into the room. And it usually starts with the feeling like there's a presence there. Some alien abduction cases can be put into that category as well. And when we're talking about things like night terror or sleep paralysis, we're not talking about a nightmare. It's like two different things. And people always get so mad when they hear they hear somebody say, oh, you had a nightmare. Night terror and nightmare, or sleep paralysis and nightmare, not the same. Sleep paralysis, when you experience that, it is like you are completely awake. You feel like you're fully functional. It's not the same as nightmare. So not good to cross those two things over. And again, here we are sort of blending into the whole idea of psychological versus paranormal phenomenon. It's a really close knit field. It really is, which is where things get tricky. There's a brilliant doctor, Dr. Christine Simmons Moore, who uncovered some really interesting research over the last couple of years. She discovered that what we were lumping into hallucinatory experiences with hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations are actually might not be as clear cut as what we thought. So hypnagogic hallucinations is when you're going into sleep and you kind of feel like maybe you've seen something, or you experience something and then you fall asleep. Hypnopompic hallucinations is when you're coming out of sleep and you think you see something in the room, or you experience something and then you wake up and it's gone. Okay, so depending on which end of that spectrum you're at, it used to be that we completely disregarded these experiences. We thought, okay, you know what? You were half asleep. This is the hypnagogic state. That's what it is. It's a hallucination, and that was it. And Christine Simmons Moore came across some really interesting research over the last number of years that has really blown the lid off of that this might actually be more than what we've been thinking it is. And we can't draw that line anymore, which becomes really difficult, because then we have to start looking at other forms of hallucination and begin to ask ourselves, is it hallucination at all, or is it somebody tuning into something else? So it's really blown the lid off of a lot of mental health cases that we would have labeled normally as something that was mental illness, and maybe now we have to question, is it really? So it's really interesting. Kaz is saying sleep paralysis is a terrifying experience. Absolutely. From what I've never had it, but I know from people that I've talked to, it's like it can ruin your life. It's just if you don't get treatment for it, it can be absolutely horrible. Dan was saying, I saw two shadow folks in a converted barn. It was a truly strange experience. Yeah, it's really interesting. And the cases, and as I say, the one that I saw was, it was as real as you want to get it. As I said, we would have classes down there, and I think in this river valley, and I think a lot of them were really curious as to exactly what was going on. Chaling's question, he was saying, is that they seem to have more than one form, and I found that as well. And the neat thing about the ones in the river valley, he brought up the idea of a forest spirit. I find that our river valley is not alone in having these kind of forest shadow people, which I find really cool too. So they seem to us, every time we experience one, to be a lot older than us. And there's always just this great respect. And I know every time that my friend Matt and I, we've investigated down there, we're very careful to be really respectful, because there's this sort of they're almost like visiting sages in a way. You go down there and you're in the presence of something special, and to be respectful of them. I think they've been there a really long time. I've had a number of people write in over the years of people who have also lived near rivers and water and things like that, and in wooded areas, and having similar experiences with these shadow people that have come out, and they've seen them or they visited with them. Really, really interesting. It's really, they're really fascinating, and I think there's something to be respected. I think they've been here a long time. As I say, I don't know exactly who they are or what they're here for. There was some talk over the years, I guess, on some forums of them being related to the First Nations, because we have a very strong First Nations background here in Alberta. And I know throughout, of course, North America, as well as, America and whatnot as well, the United States. So I think there might be some tie-in there as well. We also have a plethora of dogmen sightings here too, which are heavily tied into the First Nations cultures and stuff like that, which we also see down in similar areas in America and whatnot as well. It's really interesting. Dan was saying he woke up paralyzed once, quite frustrating, as his nose itched. He couldn't scratch it, and found out he had epilepsy that caused the paralysis. Yeah, absolutely. And here again, we've got this crossover, right, with things like neurological disorders and stuff like that versus the paranormal. But I think we have to remember that the brain is has plasticity, right? We have neuroplasticity, and everything we can train our brain. Our brain has the capacity of wiring itself differently. It can. There's so much that our brains can do, and we kind of tend to think that everybody's got the same brain, right? We think that everybody's got the same brain, and if we don't have the same brain, then it must be broken, and that's just simply not true. It's not true. I've had even experiences, with my partner where we've been at a haunted place, we've been in a haunted hotel, and both of us have seen what we would both consider an apparition, and he would see it in much greater detail than I would see it. I would definitely see movement. I would see something there. He would see it very clear. So I think there's that aspect to it as well, right? Like, we are all perceiving things in a different way. I used my snake Galen as an example so much because people automatically think, well, his brain is just less than our brain, when that's not true at all. I mean, his senses are far superior to our senses, and he perceives stuff, really interesting stuff, all the time. Shadow saying, no, everyone doesn't have the same brain. Have you seen the news here lately? We've been watching. We've been watching. Trust me, Canada has been watching, you guys. But God knows we've got our own issues up here. Let me tell you, it seems super peachy up in Canada. Let me tell you, it isn't. We've got our own crap going on that would probably make your head spin. We just don't have it as loudly, I think, as the U.S. right now, but we still do. Dan says he had cats respond to things that he couldn't see. Yeah, and as I say, like my most of my pets have done that. Galen has definitely been really interesting to watch over the years because he is so smart. He's a ball python, of course, and I've watched him over the 16 years that I've had him. I've had him since he was 6 months old. Encounter things that, I couldn't see, but he was clearly interacting with and usually quite enjoying himself. Greeting someone who I couldn't see, playing with people I couldn't see, and getting very excited about it. And so really, really cool stuff. There's been a couple of apparitions that he and I have seen together. I've seen, we used to have a ghost cat in the house, that people coming over would see it. I saw him all the time. And I remember Galen was 3 when he first saw our ghost cat, and he just lost his mind. He was terrified for a good 20 minutes. And then after that, it became something cool to go and play with. So, it's really, really interesting. So, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating field. So if you guys want more information on sort of the psychedelic drug use aspect of it, as well as like some of the tie-ins to autism studies and things like that, I highly recommend going to the Psi Encyclopedia, so PSI Encyclopedia. It is really good. It's really good because it's multiple different authors and papers and things like that from really reputable parapsychologists, psychologists, Nobel Prize winners, Harvard professors, all these people. It's really cool. The other place to go, which I find is really cool, is academia.edu. Academia.edu has got papers that have been published from, all the universities, Yale, all of, Harvard, Princeton, parapsychologists that have been, are just really well known. Apparently there's like a bunch of mentions of me in academia, and I don't have a subscription to it, but you can download the papers for free. I have no idea which papers I'm in. I have like no idea. So, and I will Dan's asking, can I post a link? Yeah, I will absolutely post a link. So anyway, I hope this was kind of helpful. As I say, I knew we were going to go down a rabbit hole today, but you know what, whatever. I found a really, really great passage for us today in Faith in the Valley by Jan Van Zandt. And I think it's fitting for the idea that we all do have different brains, and we all do perceive the world really differently. So I thought this might be the right one for today. So check this out, guys. There doesn't have to be anything wrong with you to want to do better. You don't have to be broke or brokenhearted, hated or hateful to be in search of a better way. For some reason, we seem to feel where we are is as far as we can go. We have convinced ourselves not to look for a better way, a new path, and an admission that something is not good about where we are. And this is simply not true. I can do better does not translate to I am doing bad. It is actually a recognition of the unlimited potential of the human spirit. The spirit within us has the ability to grow beyond all time, space, and physical matter in response to our receptivity. Our job is to remain open, to never be so comfortable where we are as to believe we cannot continue to grow. Most important of all, even when we believe we are the best we can be, we can do more, learn more, be more by teaching what we know to someone else. And I love that, because I think she hits the nail on the head, is that in that I can do better does not translate into I am doing bad. And no matter what you're dealing with, whether it be like your own mental health struggles or whatever it is, it doesn't mean you're doing bad. It just means that maybe there's work in some area that you can do to improve, and we never get it done. We have to remember, we never ever get it done. So once we feel better from now, we're going to want to feel better from then. We are always going to be seeking the next piece of joy. And that's really what we have to remember to do. And it doesn't matter what your brain looks like, whether it's, and this applies to everybody, whether someone is low functioning on the autistic spectrum or high functioning on the autistic spectrum. It doesn't matter. Everybody's seeking that same thing, is just to find our joy in the next moment. And, it's so funny too, because, I know so many people who are just, they're absolute geniuses when it comes to, their career, their art, what it is, because of what they have and how their brain has developed. My friend, my friend Corey, who's one of my best friends, he is an incredible music producer. He does so much audio work and stuff like that for me. We've worked together for, oh my God, it's got to be going on 10 years now almost. Absolutely brilliant composer, and runs Catalyst Productions here in Edmonton. And let me tell you, like, he can pick up an instrument and within 10 minutes have mastered the instrument, and it's that fast. He can play every single instrument on an audio track, and he might be up for a Grammy this year, which is huge. But let me tell you, like, it's really interesting that, we tend to label something that we would think of as mental illness as a negative, when ultimately, when you find what it is that you're passionate about, it can actually turn into something that is your biggest joy, your greatest talent, and all of those things. So just because something's going on doesn't necessarily mean that it's your limitation. Whatever that is, if you're limited in one area, let me tell you, you will have something going on in another area that is more enhanced than the average Joe. So and we got to pay attention to that. So just because we're lacking in one space does not mean that we are deficient. It's not a deficiency. It's just a highlight of of something that we're of something good that we've got going on. We just got to find out what that good is. What is it heightened for you? You know, it's like contrast. It's like if you've got the contrast of the negative, there has to be the contrast of the positive. And if we're stuck looking at the negative, we miss the contrast of the positive. You know, people like, you know, especially autistic children and stuff like that, let me tell you, like, they can be some of our greatest teachers on how to live in the moment, how to be more perceptive, you know, how to think differently about the brain. And yeah, so we have to be careful to not judge it and start looking at it as you know, they're a gift in our experience. It's really cool. So everybody, we got to do our affirmations before we go. So everyone take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize and am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to my connection with Source as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even in a sea of uncertainty. And at this moment, all is well. I am able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance of the life around me. I am able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find peace with the soothing silence of my inner being. Everybody take a breath. Thank you guys for such an amazing morning of spiritual healthcare. First spiritual healthcare of 2021. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? You thought who knew we'd be here for this long, right? There we go. Yeah, you know, Sally, I thank you for being here. There's so much to look at when it comes to this stuff. I will post the link to the Science Encyclopedia, and I will repost my link to my new fire video, Sweet and Gritty. That will be up on the Entity Seeker Facebook page as well. So you guys can check that out. And it's lots of fun, and it was fun to film it. And it's always fun for me to, you know, break out the fire and play with it, especially when I've got such beautiful music to do it too. So anyway, you guys, thank you so much. Shadow says she loves our spiritual healthcare days. Me too. And I will see you guys next Wednesday, right back here. You guys, of course, click subscribe on the Entity Seeker YouTube page. If you could, that would be awesome. And there's going to be more stuff that's posted up there as we go. Thank you all so much for everything. Of course, you can find us on youtube.com/entityseeker, as well as entityseeker.ca. All the classes are posted there, so you guys can find them there as well. Bye, everybody.